this is going to be hard. This is going to be challenging. You're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And if we all arrive at the end of the process and you're still sort of like, I don't know about this, don't buy that business.
Representing Franchise Secrets, Erik Van Horn.
Nic, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it, Eric. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, it's about time you say yes. I've been bugging you for a while now. You're always too busy, too important to get on the show. So thanks for making some time for once, man.
I'm not sure if it's too important, Eric, but Bobby Brennan and Mel over there at GoGlo, they're certainly keeping me busy. That's for sure.
So I've wanted to get you on for a while now. I don't know if I've ever had somebody that is just like franchise development focused. Bobby's been on, but he's with Front Street and he's kind of one of the leaders there, but I don't think I've ever had just like pure franchise development on. So I think this will be an interesting one. One, it's my background. That's how I got started in franchising. And so I just look back in my career and that was just such a foundation for me. So looking forward to just kind of getting into all things franchise development, but it's really going to be much more than franchise development because I want to get into your background, like why you take a job, not just for a job or a paycheck, but there's bigger reasons for it. I found in franchise development, like you're reading people, you have to understand people, read people, and make decisions. And like you're making big decisions for some of these potential franchisees. Like they can either get into business for themselves because you approve them and you help them go down a process, or you can stop that for them. And I know that you've said no to people. And that's not an easy conversation. So this podcast is going to be much more about like people and whatnot versus just like a franchise development podcast. So with all of that said, why don't we get into your background and go like, give us how did you get started in franchising? Maybe even before franchising, like who is Nic Leland? How did you get to where you are today?
Well, I found franchising a little bit on accident. Believe it or not, the first plan A in life was to go to medical school. So actually, I did all of the clinical experience. I did all the prerequisites. I got a biology degree. And that was the original path. I don't know if your listeners are familiar at all with the medical school application process, but it's very long and really complex, and it takes almost a whole year. So long story short, I did not get in my first time around, which turns out to be one of the best things that could have happened to me. I took a little bit of time. I said, before I jump back into applying again, I'm going to take some time and do something different. And at the time was the general manager of a wellness facility that I soon learned was a franchise. One thing led to another, and I jumped over to the corporate team. And then for about 2 or 3 years, I was traveling coast to coast with the education team, doing trainings, getting locations stood up, helping with grand openings, and supporting what was a very rapidly growing franchise system. That system grew actually perhaps a little bit too quickly. You had actually Steve Welch, the co-founder of that business, Restore is what it's called. He was on the show a couple months back and unfortunately was included in a round of layoffs in November of 2022 as the business was kind of right-siding itself, and found my way into franchise development. First foray into franchise development, I wasn't necessarily the right fit with the brand, but I did very fortuitously meet Bobby Brennan at a conference a couple summers ago. At the time, there wasn't any option or opportunity for any of the brands right away, but he had told me, "Hey, let's stay in touch. Let's keep the conversation rolling." And then when it came time for me to make the jump, and I'd love to get into a little bit more about why Front Street. And I know that's one of the things that we were going to talk about here today, but a little bit later that year, October of 23, made the jump over to Front Street, was quickly introduced to the GoGlo team, and have been working on the franchise development for that brand ever since.
Perfect. That's a good summary. Yeah, I remember Bobby telling us about you and we're at that conference. He's like, you guys gotta check out Nic. Like he's a rock star in the making, and with some molding and some mentorship, this guy's gonna be amazing. You were just with the wrong brand. So and he knew that, and we didn't have any opportunity. But that's what Bobby's great at, is just planting the seed, and then when there is opportunity, then obviously we're going to present it. Let's go back. Rejected, rejected from medical school. Like how hard was that at the time? You were probably pretty young. You're still young.
Yeah, I would have been, I guess, at the conclusion. I, graduated college, normal time, 21, 22. That was the path. That was sort of really from the time that I was in maybe even middle school. It was like, all right, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that's what I had worked towards for a really long period of time. Studied really hard in school, focused all my attention on my studies, and got to the point where, the nature of a pre-med major or someone who's studying biology is you got a lot of people in the 101 classes your freshman year that don't necessarily make it to senior year with you. The pool gets whittled down over time. So of course, in my head, I'm thinking, all right, well, this is it. I made it. I made it to the finish line on the other side. I'm going to be a shoo-in for something like this. And then, I found out, of course, in retrospect, that it's not uncommon for people not to make it in their first time. Sometimes it takes a few application cycles, but yeah, to your point, it was tough. I mean, that was the path, that was the journey. And so at the time, to be quite honest with you, being in the managerial position I was in and working for that franchise was a little bit of a band-aid, a little bit of a stopgap opportunity for me while I figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And then when I had gotten laid off from the position that I was in, I had another reckoning, 5 years later, what do I want to be when I grew up? And then met Bobby, had worked with the Front Street team, and was like, oh, maybe this is what I want to be when I grow up. I think it's the path doesn't necessarily go the way that you think it's supposed to, but ultimately I think I've ended up right where I'm supposed to be.
I remember I was a C student, like, and I took some harder like finance classes and whatnot when I was getting my business degree, and I did really well with those. Like I got A's in some of the harder classes because I enjoyed those. But like most classes, I was, straight C student, just because I just didn't enjoy school itself. But then I applied to law school. I got in, I got accepted, and I was ready to go. And I know at that time, a lot of people, they start to think of themselves as a lawyer when you're going into law school, and that starts to become a part of like your identity. And probably the same for medical school. Like you probably thought you were going to be a doctor or in the medical field somewhat. And then like it's nothing. So like, was that hard just from an identity standpoint, thinking you're going to be something with a more of a prestigious title or career, and then that's gone? Was that difficult at all?
Very much so. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. You make this part of your identity. That is who you are. I'm with my peers, and we're this cohort of people that we're going to do this thing. And I have some of the peers that I graduated with that are doing that now. But there came a point for me when I hadn't gotten in, when I had applied, the whole process went through, where I asked myself the question, like, is this what I really want to be doing? Because when you're applying for medical school, you also realize that there's many, many more years ahead of you. It's not just medical school, but then it's residency and potential fellowships and additional specialty training and things like that. And I was realizing, all right, I'm going to be probably in my mid 30s before I quote unquote make it, before I get to where I want to be. And at the time I was feeling a little bit impatient. It was sort of like, all right, I'm ready to do something different, I think. But yeah, I mean, it was hard. There is a letting go of who you thought you were going to be. And not just who you thought you were going to be, but also who your professors thought you were going to be, and your friends and all these other people. And I think there's this sort of expectation, and I think you use the word identity, that you do have to sort of move to the other side of it before you're ready to open your eyes up to what other future opportunities there might be.
So as you work with people that are wanting to buy a franchise now, like, does that come into play? Like their work is their identity, or maybe sometimes they thought that was going to be like what they wanted to do. And then they discovered, like, I saw the writing on the wall with being an attorney. And I'm just like, there's no way I want to do that now. I read the book, The Firm, and that's 100% true of all attorneys. That I mean, they work all the time, and they make good money. But then I had the idea of, like, I would rather be the guy, the entrepreneur that pays the attorneys a lot of money, because I have a lot of money and I will pay them to do the thing that they're really good at. And that's not the thing that I enjoy. So I really started to understand I want to get paid a lot of money for the things I really enjoy. Now, there were certain things I enjoyed along the way of my franchising journey and career, but right now, like, I enjoy everything. Jeff, a business partner over at Front Street, he did a post the other day, and we talked about it on the podcast the other day, about, like, when we were out in Key West, like, we had a great time out there, but then coming back, and he was on 14 hours of calls with brands and our current brands and future brands. He's just like, I am fired up. I love this. And I was talking to him after the podcast. He's like, Erik, I'm just having so much fun. This is the best. And so I started to understand, you can have your cake and eat it too. It's not always easy, but you put in the dues and you put in the hours, and then there's something about being an entrepreneur. Being in franchise development is an amazing life. Like, that is a great career. There's so many different places within franchising that you can make a lot of money and have a really good life. But just enjoying your job, enjoying what you do. Like, talk about, like, what would you tell your younger self now about where you are today? Like, what would you go back and tell the younger Nic that maybe just got rejected or laid? Some people get laid off, some people get the rejection letter. And then that is the catalyst for the thing that they do next. What advice would you have given yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what I found, and my fiance Jessie, I'll use her as a quick example. She is currently in graduate school, ready to go be a therapist. That's kind of what she's studying. That's what she's doing. That's great. I know a lot of other people that they find a particular passion and a thing that they are really into, and that, hey, I'm going to pursue this and do that with all my time, all my energy. I think what I found for myself is that the pieces adjacent to my role are a little bit more important to me than the actual role itself. In this case, if you were to tell me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, hey, you're going to be on a podcast talking about the fact that you do franchise development for a sunless tanning and skincare concept, I'd be like, no, there's no way. Like, that's not the goal. That's not the plan. What are you talking about? I don't even, to be honest with you, before I got into this world of franchising, I didn't even know that this existed. Like, I was completely unaware that this was a job that people did. But now being here, and I think I'll get a little bit to kind of why Front Street. When I was making a pivot from one brand to another a couple of years back, and I've told him this before, so great to be able to talk about it here. But one of the key things that drew me to Front Street in the first place was the fact that at that conference a couple summers ago, Bobby gave me his phone number. He sent me his email. He said, hey, anytime that you need coaching, mentorship, you've got any questions. At the time, I was pretty much a newbie in the world of franchise development. He gave of his time. He had nothing to gain from me. I truly had nothing to offer him. He's the one with all the experience and the time and the expertise. And he freely gave of his time to me. On multiple occasions, it would be like, I've never taken someone up on that offer. You go to conferences, you hear, hey, yeah, call me anytime. And I was like, man, I've never actually called anybody, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to call this guy because I felt like there was some things I could learn from him. So back to the original question, what advice would I give? I think for me, I've found that the people that I'm working with, the peers that I have, the mentors that are in my life, the lifestyle that I'm able to have, the freedom and the flexibility. I'm joining you here from my home office. My kitchen is about 20 feet that direction. My living room is 10 feet the other way. I mean, that is not necessarily a lifestyle that I had anticipated for myself. But I think I have found over time that is much more important for me as opposed to necessarily the prestige or the title or the specifics of, hey, I got to have this job as, a doctor, a lawyer. I mean, a ton of respect for the people that are doing those things, but I found for me, that just wasn't the path.
Yeah, same way for me. I was in the tax business, like the income tax preparation business, which was really back then about helping people get refunds. And it was not an exciting business, especially for, early 20s. And what made that nice were the people was the people that I was around, and they're still friends today. And I've been business partners with many of my, fellow franchisees at that franchise. And so, yeah, having relationships with the people that I worked for and the people that I worked with as a franchisee or in franchise development, they're still good friends today. And I learned so much. And what you said about Bobby is 100% true. Like, Bobby's a big deal in franchise development. People know Bobby, and just has an amazing reputation. But that's who he is. Like, you'll see somebody that's hungry, that wants to learn, and he will give his time, because that's just who he is. And you said not expecting anything in return. But then when somebody does take him up and he gets to know them, then it's like an interview. So he was interviewing you without you knowing that. He was coaching you. You're getting the free coaching. He was doing some interviewing. And a lot of us just see how quickly he picks things up, and just what you do with it, and who you are, your demeanor, and how you are relationally. So that's why we love Bobby. All right. Anything else about that time, Bobby, Front Street franchise development, before we kind of get into some different stuff here?
No, I mean, I'll add the context that at the time I was actively looking at other franchise sales organizations, which I know you speak about at length on here, and you've had other perspectives around those. And to be quite honest with you, at the very first moment, Front Street was sort of this little scrappy startup that it was kind of like, we got a couple brands over here, whereas you got these 800-pound gorillas in the room that I'm talking to that, perhaps are a little bit more well-established, or they seemed that way at the time. But there was just something about the relationships. There was something about the level of intentionality and connection. And like I said, the fact that folks like Bobby and yourself and Jeff, I interacted with each of you collectively and individually, and it felt like there was something really special going on. And it was probably a bit of a gamble at the time. When I came over, Bobby had said, "Hey, I don't know what brand we're going to put you on. We've got a couple brands that we're kind of bringing in." He's like, "Just come take some leads and let's figure this thing out." And I was like, "You know what? Let's go. Let's do it." And this goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago. I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was still at the time dipping my toes in this world of franchise development of like, is this where I want to be, or is this another stopgap before I really figure it out? And it was kind of like, all right, what the heck, let's do it. And almost 2 years later, I can definitely say the gamble has paid off. It's a great spot to be.
You're 100% right. It was a gamble. If we were different people, because you didn't know, if we were different people, or this wasn't as much of a focus as it really was, it would have been a bad bet. What you didn't know is, like, we were all in on Front Street, but those are early days. And one of the things that we decided early on, and you heard Jeff randomly say it, and I did a post on it, but Jeff, when we were having breakfast and we were just kind of going around the table, just sharing some stuff, Jeff blurted out, like, "Man, the Jeff from 10 years ago, I think he said 10 years ago, we'd have 10 different brands by now. We don't have 10 different brands. We have 4 brands right now. And we'll have a couple more by the end of the year." But, 10 years ago, we would have had a bunch of brands. We would have had a full service, FSO. We would have measured our success by how many brands we have, how many territories we sell. That would have been the measuring stick. Now it's like, we are more concerned about having deep impact on the founders that we're working with. And we have all hands on deck calls with them at different times. Different founders of Front Street are working with our founders at different times. And we're having conversations around increasing their enterprise value, which a lot of times it means, and I'm having a guest on the podcast, Patrick Gallagher, with Boxwood, and he's an investment banker. So we're going to get into some of this with him, but like, what increases enterprise value? And I think that'll be eye-opening to a lot of founders out there, because they think FSOs, or franchise sales organizations, or hiring an amazing franchise development person is the key to success in franchising. You need someone that can sell, but you need someone that can sell the right people. And then you need those people to become amazing franchisees. And that's where all the magic is. That's where all the work happens. So we're going to get into that with Patrick next, but you didn't know that about us. And, but I think anybody that's buying a franchise, they're taking a risk and they have to, at some point, just make a decision. Talk about that a little bit. What have you, as you just started to, get better at evaluating people, working with Bobby to help you understand the mindset of a franchise buyer? Like what about risk comes to mind? Like, how do you help people overcome the risk aspect? Or maybe you validate their own fear around risk and realize this person's probably not going to make it. Talk about what you understand about risk.
We have sort of a running, I don't know if it's a joke, but a thing that we say very consistently is that we try to scare people off when it comes to buying this business. And I know you've said it multiple times from the perspective of a founder. Like the first rule of franchising your business is don't franchise your business. There's got to be this deep down, resolute approach from a founder's and a franchisor's perspective that this is what we should absolutely be doing. But I think the same idea is true from a candidate or a prospective franchisee's perspective as well. I saw a post on LinkedIn, and I don't remember exactly who had said it, but it was, are you ready to buy a business? The answer is yes, or the answer is no. If the answer is maybe, then you shouldn't do this. And so our goal, and I think where some people potentially miss the mark from a franchise development standpoint, is my goal is not necessarily to get you to a yes. My goal is to get you to a decision. And if the answer is no, that's okay. Mm-hmm. But this is not just a unilateral yes or no either. We do this as a mutual evaluation process. We are evaluating prospective franchisees at the same time that they are evaluating the brand, and making sure that there is a solid 2 yes situation. This is a 2 yes, 1 no. If either side, if the candidate or the brand says no at any point, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. We want to make sure that people are ready to go. And so to your point about fear, I think there's always going to be some level of natural fear before you make a big decision like this one, before you bet on yourself. There's a lot of people we talk to that this is the first foray that they have. They're giving up a bit of their identity that we were talking about a few minutes ago, that, hey, I'm a corporate guy. I've been climbing the ladder in corporate, and now I'm going to do something completely different, very much outside of my comfort zone. And if you arrive at the end of that process and you are not absolutely resolute in the decision that you're making, and you don't know that what you're about to do is going to be hard, very rewarding, has the fantastic potential and upside. This is going to be hard. This is going to be challenging. You're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And if we all arrive at the end of the process and you're still sort of like, I don't know about this, don't buy that business. Just don't do it. I mean, it's going to save you and the franchisor a lot of time, money, and headache. So I think there's a natural level of fear. Before we come to confirmation day, the last step in our franchise approval process, Bobby Brennan will always run the call right beforehand. And he'll always tell every candidate, make your why and your why not list. And I'll be honest with you, the first couple of times I heard him say that, I was like, Bobby, aren't you trying to make sales? What are you talking about? You're telling these people to come up with reasons why not to buy the business. But the reality is the why and the why not list is never going to change. So you have to decide which of those is going to be bigger and more powerful for you. So I do think there's a natural level of fear, but are you going to let that fear overwhelm and overcome your decision making? Or are you going to say, you know what, this is going to be hard. This is going to be something that's challenging. There's risk associated with this, but let's do it. Let's bet on ourselves and let's go.
Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are 2 really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisor and you're frustrated that you're not awarding as many franchises as you thought you would, this is the reason I created the Franchisor Mastermind. If you want access to the information, the techniques that the best franchise sales organizations are using to award franchises, and you want what mature brands have with their playbook of having happy, successful franchisees that grow the right way, then you might want to check out the Franchisor Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections. They want the playbook to achieve both short-term and long-term success. They want to increase enterprise value in their brand. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com.
All right, that all sounds fine and dandy, Nic, but it sounds like that's a pitch that a franchisor would make. Somebody really good who's been coached by Bobby Brennan could make. And it's true. There are really good franchise development people that could say the same thing that you just said and not mean it, because they're trying to get franchise sales. Like, that's the reason. So they could say all the right things. So just be aware out there, buyers, like what Nic just said is 100% true, not just for Front Street brands, but other brands as well. I was just, talking to one of the, I'm stumbling here because I want to be careful how I say it. I was talking to one of the broker leaders at one of the major broker networks, and we were letting them know, hey, we're about ready to not approve one of the consultants, brokers, candidates, and we know the brokers or consultants not going to be too excited about that. But this person told us, like, hey, I'm glad you guys do that. And he knew that we would not approve the wrong person. But then he also said they just had somebody else not get approved by another FSO. And this FSO is one that is kind of known for doing a lot of volume, and they have a background of that. And by the way, anybody listening, it's not the one that you're probably thinking. It's a different one. But what it did for me is I'm like, awesome. They're just not approving everyone either. So there are brands out there that will just talk. They will say what Nic just said and absolutely not mean it. But just know that there are a good number of brands or FSOs out there that do mean this. And I know Nic and Front Street and our brands absolutely mean this. Like, we get to be a part of the behind the scenes conversations, Nic, where the founders are like, I don't know about this person. I don't know if, Mel is like, I don't know if we should approve them. I don't know. And that absolutely happens. So if you are looking at brands, just know some of them are just trying to sell you, and some of them are absolutely looking for the right franchise partners. Anything to add to that? Because I know that you get to be behind the scenes and a part of these conversations as well.
Yeah, I think, for me, and this goes back to a little bit of the original experience. Before I got involved in franchise development, I was in the operations and the training space. And so this wasn't over a Zoom call. This was at the end of this process. People are about to open the doors, and there's a lot of fear before you sign your franchise agreement, but there's also a lot of fear right before you open your doors for the first time, because it's, hey, the money is out there, the capital has been outlaid, the equipment is purchased, the staff is hired, training is done. What if nobody shows up on the first day? And so I remember distinctly sitting across the table from a lot of people that they're scared. I mean, it's right before you open your business. It's a big deal. They may have left behind a very lucrative career. And so I will say the stakes are higher than I think some people will consider. Like I said, buying a business like this can be a very fulfilling, and in a lot of cases, you've had people on here, it's a very profitable venture in certain ways, but also the stakes are high. And I think it's important for folks in the world of franchise development to, one, make sure that they understand that these are people's lives that we're talking about. Like, this is life savings. This is sometimes kids' college funds that we're loaning ourselves from, and making sure that we stay in alignment from that standpoint. But you mentioned the case of not awarding people. The running joke, I guess I'll use that word again. One of the running things that we say all the time is, it's my job to fire people. And that sounds a little aggressive. It's not, you're fired. But we do want to make sure that we are consistently aligning on if this is the right fit. And so to anybody listening, I think one of the things, Erik, you said, hey, everybody's going to say what Nic did, but not everybody's going to mean it. make sure that you stack those words up with the lived experience of the people that are in the brand. I think we will regularly create opportunities for our candidates to interact directly with the leadership team and also interact directly with franchisees. And so I think that leadership and validation step is really important. I will always tell someone, take everything I tell you with a grain of salt. I'm the sales guy. I have a vested interest in whether or not you buy this business or not. Go talk to other people. Go talk to the franchisee that's doing the thing. Get in the weeds with these folks and ask them the direct questions. Hey, here's what they told me about the way that they're approaching franchise development and growth. Is that true to your experience? And the answer is going to be a pretty obvious yes or no. And I think as a buyer, you'll probably get a pretty quick idea on whether the person on the other side of the table is just trying to get you across the finish line, or if they are really looking for true partners with mutual alignment on the growth strategy.
How do you fire people? Because I know it's not Donald Trump, the apprentice from back in the day. You're fired. There are off ramps for people. Like, the goal isn't to like bum people out. And sometimes it does come to that. I've had to have these conversations at Discovery Day after Discovery Day, where, myself and the brand founder got together and we're like, this person is not going to make it. And this person was they had financially very well qualified. They had the time to be able to put in the business, but they didn't have what we thought it would take to manage the types of people that they were going to be overseeing and the ability to manage the managers that they were going to be managing. And I remember calling the consultant. The consultant was not happy at all, like very upset, but that's okay. He also understood, because he'd been in franchise development himself at some point. So he also understood. And then the candidate who'd been to Discovery Day, really thinking they were going to be talking about identity, he was in his mind now an entrepreneur and part of this brand. And I had to tell him, he's not approved. And he cried on the phone with me. And so that just made me look and like, is there anything that I could have done to have prevented it to get this from getting this far earlier in the process? What did I need to do to get better in franchise development so I don't make a grown man cry on the phone with me for not being approved? So how do you guys, you and Bobby and the team, look at off-ramping some of these people that you just don't think are going to be the right fit?
I think there's, to your point of off ramps, I think it's a great term. We set up our development process in a number of different stages. So you'll have things like your introductory call. We'll go through the unit economics. We'll review the FDD together. We'll look at territories. I mean, there's these numerous steps that need to be accomplished, things that we need to go through before we even arrive at a discovery or confirmation day later on in the process. And I think it's all about setting realistic expectations and being overly communicative. I think over time, brands will refine the avatar of who they're looking for, but that avatar can also change over time. Who we're looking for from a GoGlow standpoint today is probably different than what we're going to be looking for 2 to 3 years from now. Because when you are at a different stage of development of a brand, you're looking for different types of people. So I think it's realistic expectations. And to be honest with you, there are occasional times, like you mentioned, and I've been in the exact same boat, where someone gets all the way through the process and at the last, something happens, or at Discovery Day, confirmation day, it's just not the right fit. I don't think this is going to be the right opportunity. But more often than not, folks will self-select out. We set a realistic expectation of, this is a pioneering, emerging brand. This is what it's going to look like for you. And occasionally you'll have folks that say, hey, I want to buy a business as sort of an accessory to what I'm doing right now. This is something I want to do 10 hours a week. I'm looking for something that's a little bit of a different model, and that's okay. I think to your point, we regularly work with broker and consultant partners. I also think it's really important to be very communicative to them about any concerns that you may have about the fit of their candidate from the very first moment. I mean, if I get off an introductory call and I see what we call yellow flags, I make sure that I pick up the phone and call that person and say, hey, I'm not saying I'm this person's not going to be a fit, but here are the things that we need to be aware of. Because if 2 or 3 steps down the way, we have a moment where it's, hey, I don't think this person's going to be the right fit. Let's redirect them to an opportunity that might be a better fit. And I think that's more often than not, and that's why I say it's a bit of a joke that I'm the one that fires people. Very, very often, I'd say the vast majority of the time, it is a mutual alignment. It is, hey, I don't necessarily know if you're going to be the right fit for this. And they will most of the time self-select out and say, hey, I don't think I'm going to be the right fit for this. That's not to say you're not going to be a great franchisee. That's not to say that you're not going to be an incredibly successful business owner. This just may not be the right opportunity for you. And, when you were telling that story, Eric, I have a very distinct memory of someone who came all the way through the process, made it to the end of confirmation day. And this doesn't happen super often, but there was a case maybe 6 months into my role where the brand team said, no, this person is not the right fit. And it was disappointing for everybody. It was a huge bummer. There were tears, there were pleadings, there were, oh my gosh, please give me another chance. But ultimately, a few months later, that person purchased a completely different franchise business that they are now thriving in. And funny enough, that person actually showed up to the grand opening of a GoGlow franchisee's location in the territory that they were previously looking at. So in this case, it was, there's a lot of disappointment in the moment, but ultimately, I think that's going to push you towards something that might be the right fit. And that's really where, back to your point about fear and decision making, my goal and my role is not to get you to be a GoGlow franchisee. If you're going to be a GoGlow franchisee and you're going to be the right fit, great. Let's talk about what that's going to look like and let's push you towards that. But my goal is to get you to a decision. If you are ready to make the decision to be a GoGlow franchisee, I'm going to hold up the mirror on numerous occasions. And so is Bobby, and so is Mel, and so is Tori. And we're going to make sure you understand this is what it's going to look like to be a GoGlow franchisee. Are you sure that you're in for that? Are you ready to do this? Because if you're in, we're in too. But like I said, more often than not, when you hold up that mirror, there's occasionally people that are like, you know what? It's not for me. And that's A-okay, because I do think that creates an opportunity for you to, you say no here, or it's a no from this perspective. Maybe there's another yes waiting on the other side of that.
I think I didn't know that story, by the way, or I'm sure I did. I knew a little bit about it at some point, but I didn't know that I didn't know there were tears. I didn't know that they went to a GoGlow opening in the territory that they were going to buy. I didn't have any clue of that, but made me think, your job, you did a good job of educating this person on franchising, realized this person was not the right fit for GoGlow. But doesn't mean they weren't the right fit for franchising. And too many people just kind of put franchising in this big box and they're like, I want to be a franchisee, but that means so many different things. I mean, there's, you'd categorize GoGlow into like the beauty industry or the wellness industry. And there's a lot of different types of brands and types of ownership models within, and founders and support systems. And there's just so many things within the wellness and the beauty industry. I don't know where that person ended up going. They might have gone into a service-based business for all I know, and that's a better fit for them. But, as you're thinking about franchises, just don't over categorize them too quickly. You need to dive into it. And you didn't realize they were the right fit until a certain point. So that's why it's just important to do for people to go through the entire process, with different brands. Got me thinking too. So when you first get an application, well, let me back up. Broker versus website lead. Immediately, what comes to mind between those two different lead sources?
I think there's a completely different approach. I mean, obviously, we're going to still take them through the same steps, but I think the type of education and the approach that each respective candidate is going to come from looks vastly different. So, for instance, you have someone who comes through the GoGlow website, or more often than not, this is a quick shout out to you here, Eric. We get a lot of folks that come and they say, hey, I heard about GoGlow on the Franchise Secrets podcast. I heard about, I heard Mel's story. Actually, a quick aside, last month we had a franchisee join, and in her one-on-one meeting at the very end of confirmation day, she named the number of the episode that she was listening to because it was so transformative for her to say, I heard Melanie's story and I knew I had to be a part of something like that. So often you'll have people who will come and they say, hey, I want GoGlow. This is really what I'm interested in. And occasionally when that happens, there's a bit of franchising 101 that we make sure that we're doing. And also, I think, there are benefits and drawbacks to either approach. When someone comes in and it's the only thing that they're looking at, occasionally they'll get closer to the end of the process and say, okay, well, what questions am I not asking? Because I don't have any sort of basis of comparison. Whereas when we have someone that comes from a broker or a consultant partner, those are people who often say, hey, I think I want to be a business owner, but I don't necessarily know what business it's going to be. And so in that case, you typically are looking at 3, 4, 5 businesses at one time. So I would say the education process is the same, but the goal, the mechanics of it can look a little bit different behind the scenes. But when we're looking at it, I mean, I want to make sure that you understand what it's like to be GoGlow. Typically, folks that come from Franchise Secrets or through the website, they already have an understanding and an appreciation of who GoGlow is. And then often we need to give a little bit more of a perspective around the business owner component of it. Whereas typically when we work with folks that come from a broker or a consultant partner, they have an understanding about the business element and some of the machinations and the different pieces behind the scenes. But then we need to talk about the product and get them excited about the particulars of the business. So I would say there's different pieces, there's different areas and gaps that you need to fill in as you go through the process, depending on what that approach is from the very first call.
All right. There's some brokers that are a 10 out of 10. And then there are some brokers that are a 1 out of 10. I don't know if you work with many 1 out of 10 brokers. I'm sure you have at some point, but I just want, from your perspective as the person that gets the candidate or the lead from a broker consultant, what's the difference between a 1 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10 consultant or broker?
Well, only 10 out of 10s listen to Franchise Secrets.
That's right.
Listening to this right now, they're already a 10 out of 10. I think it really has to do with I think both an understanding of who GoGlow is, but also an understanding of what it means to be a franchise owner. I think, as a quick aside, when we talk about ownership model, you'll hear Bobby and Jeff and yourself speak to, we don't necessarily call it semi-passive or semi-absentee. We call it the executive, because you're the CEO of your business. The buck stops with you. Now, can you scale this over time to be more of a passive or an absentee venture? Yeah, absolutely. But you got to get your hands dirty. You got to roll up your sleeves and be involved in your business. Now, does that mean that you're going to be the person doing the thing day after day? No, not necessarily. But I will tell you, we're talking about the difference between a 10 out of 10 and a 1 out of 10 referral source. I think a 10 out of 10, somebody walks in and they understand what it's going to look like to be a franchise owner. They have a realistic picture of, I think sometimes people think buying a franchise is like, oh, this is a cheat code and it's going to be easy. You absolutely have certain legs up. There are processes in place. There's a support network of fellow entrepreneurs. There's a lot of fantastic benefits, but you're still buying a business. And I think people that are coming from those 10 out of 10, they have a realistic understanding of what that looks like. And I also think those are brokers and consultants who take the time to understand why this person might be a fit for this business in the first place. Instead of just saying like, yeah, I think GoGlow is cool. They're awarding territories. There's some, I think so. Yeah, just go over there. I mean, this is a real story. I was on a call with someone, and not only were they unfamiliar with the category, they had literally never heard of a spray tan before. They just didn't know what it was at all. And it was like, I picked up the phone immediately after and I was like, hey, I don't think this person's going to make it very far in the process. And they were like, no, you got to give this guy a chance. He's really smart. He's really capable. I was like, I don't doubt that he's really smart and he's really capable. But if we're on our very first call and there's not an immediate excitement and an appreciation for what we're talking about here, this is probably not going to make it very far. So I think the 10s out of 10s and the people that we really love working with are those who send us folks that I think have a realistic picture and an understanding of what it's going to take to be a business owner. And also, there's already some level of connection to this brand. Maybe they're a prior spray tanner themselves. Maybe they love the beauty category. Maybe they don't know anything about beauty, but they're really excited to be engaged with their community. I mean, there's got to be some sort of a connection. Occasionally, you do have folks that are throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, but rarely do those folks make it very far in the process.
I think anybody that's in franchise development should listen to this podcast to understand what a 9 out of 10 franchise development guy looks like. And I'm, 10 out of 10, there's only a handful of people that are 10 out of 10. And that just comes from years of being in the trenches and having even more reps like Bobby and myself and Jeff. But like what you're spitting is gold here. And I really think consultants should be listening to this to know like what great and extraordinary it looks like. And franchise development people should be listening and watching this one, because this is like what you're seeing here without realizing it is a masterclass on how to be a great in franchise development. So that just kind of hit me. So I wasn't even thinking about other people in franchise development listening to this when I first wanted to get you on. But, after listening to this as we're going through it, I'm like, they should be listening to this because it will make franchising better. And it's because you're such a good student. You're a student and you're always learning and you're always getting better. Another question for you. When you first get an application, what do you first look at? I know for me, I looked at the money. Are these guys qualified? So I would immediately go to the financial statement of it. But, those were the early days for me, and I probably would still do it. But what about you? You get an application, you get the information coming through. What do you do when you look over that? What's important to you?
I think there's a bit of it depends. It depends on where it's coming from. We go back to the conversation around who's a 10 out of 10 broker or consultant partner and who's a 1 out of 10. There is a varying level of detail when we initially get information from candidates. So financials is definitely important. When we talk about the right fit for a business, you'll hear Bobby Brennan, I think he's mentioned it on an episode before, the 5 C's. One of the C's is capital. We want to make sure that there is not an overextension by anybody. We want to make sure that they have the capital to get this business started and a little bit of runway if it doesn't ramp as quickly as they're expecting it to. So I'd be lying if I said I didn't look at the financial component of it, just because if for whatever reason you are very underqualified from that component, that's an opportunity to very quickly redirect this person somewhere else. Like this is just not going to be the right fit for you. And maybe you could go talk to one of our funding partners and get an SBA loan pre-approval, but you'd probably be doing it by the skin of your teeth. If all of a sudden you're going to put out 90% of your liquidity towards this business, don't buy that business. Just don't do it. There's a lot of options out there that are going to be less expensive that are not in the brick and mortar space. So financials is definitely important. You want to make sure that is there. I will tell you, there are some of the franchise consultants that we work with that they send a lot of great detail. And I was mentioning a few minutes ago of what makes that person 10 out of 10. Well, they are evaluating, is this person the right fit for this particular business? So I love when I get not just hey, here's the CQ or the confidential questionnaire with name and address and financials, but hey, this is the intake that I did with this person. And here's the characteristics of what they're looking for and what they're excited about. And here's why I think it fits for your business. So sometimes all you get is here's their name and here's their net worth, and we got to figure it out from there. But I will say for those partners those consultants that maybe they're just sending some base level information, that's also an opportunity for me to pick up the phone and build a relationship with that person. Hey, I know you sent me this person. What you got for me? What's in their background that you think makes a fit here? And you will very quickly realize and understand, hey, this is a person that I think is maybe going to go the distance, or this might be an opportunity for us to redirect them pretty quickly. So yeah, money's important, but you also want to take into account what's their background, where are they from, what kind of territory are they looking for, what's their growth strategy, and the intake that we have will sometimes have varying levels of detail around that.
So last question, before I let you go. I remember early on in my franchise development career, looking at financial statements and being like, wow, some of these people make a lot of money, but they don't have much of a net worth. And other people like, wow, they don't make a lot of money every year, but they have a significant net worth. Or man, they just have so much debt. They're living paycheck to paycheck, even if they're making $500,000 a year. So it's those types of things that were surprising to me. When you look at some of these financial statements, what have you learned? Or what are some of your takeaways or the things that are interesting to you?
I think, a quick financial statement can tell you a lot about people's priorities. And, you had a podcast recently. By the way, Eric, I got to say, it's a cool full circle moment. I've definitely been a listener and a fan of yours even before joining Front Street. So that was one of the other things. I got to give you some credit. Bobby Brennan, we've given him a lot of his flowers here today. It was also pretty cool that it was like, oh man, if I join Front Street, does that mean I get to meet Erik Van Horn? So to be here, it is very cool. You had an episode recently where you were talking about, not just creating wealth, but also building wealth and exits. And that is sort of intertwined into some various other areas. But I think when you look at someone's financials and you get a more clear picture, you get an idea of what their priorities are. Is this someone who they've got a flashy job, they're making a lot of money, and they're also buying a lot of things? Or is this someone who they're investing their money, they're building over for the long term? But I also think there's a lot of people who have been building wealth for a really long time that don't really know why they're building wealth. They don't really understand what they're going to be using it for. And I do think that's where leveraging, not over leveraging, but leveraging some of that accumulated wealth over time into potential business opportunities, I think is pretty cool. And I think, being able to use what people have and add a little bit of elbow grease and some good old fashioned hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, you can multiply that over time. And I think that's where the franchising industry definitely shines.
Nic, this has been fun, man. This was a great episode. I cannot wait to get this thing out. So I'm so glad you chose Front Street. It's going to be fun to see where you are, because at Front Street, we're wanting to give people opportunity beyond just where they start out. And we're doing things so different than anybody else out there. So dude, who knows where you're going to be in 5 or 10 years. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to watch. It's fun when you see winners. Like, that's what we look for at Front Street. We look for winners. We look for winners like Nic to join the team. We look for winner founders and winning brands. And when you surround yourselves around winners, life is just so much more fun and easier. So glad you're part of the team, and thanks for coming on the pod, man.
Appreciate you having me, Eric. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.